It will help you create that strong, sculpted shoulder cap while also improving your shoulder health. Hey guys, it's Corey from Redefining Strength, and today I want to talk about the 5 best shoulder moves you probably aren't doing, but should be including. When we think about working the shoulder, we have to remember that there are 3 different aspects of the deltoid muscle. There's the anterior portion, the middle portion, which we often call the lateral portion, and also the posterior delt. We need to make sure that we're including moves that address all 3 different aspects because each performs a different function. So when you're designing your routine, you need to make sure that you're moving your shoulder or your shoulder joint in all the different planes of motion. We also need to be very conscious of the postural distortions we have from our desk jobs. Because we're sitting hunched and rounded over, that is going to restrict our shoulder mobility. When we go to do some of those shoulder exercises, we have to remember that restricted mobility could lead to overload and injury. So we need to make sure that we're doing moves that not only open up our shoulders, but improve our shoulder health while also making our shoulders strong and sexy. What are those 5 must-do shoulder moves? Shoulder exercise number 1 is the chest press to overhead press. So overhead pressing is one of those moves that can lead to shoulder injuries, especially if we do lack thoracic extension. It's why when I include overhead pressing for my clients, I like to use dumbbells. I also like this variation because it puts less of an emphasis on the loads we're moving and more of an emphasis on time under tension. This move creates great time under tension because you're pressing the weights away from your chest, which is a really challenging movement for your anterior delt. You're also including that overhead press, which will get your anterior and your middle delt as well. But because of that forward chest press, you're not going to be able to use the loads you might normally use in an overhead press. But you're still going to get benefit because there's more time under tension for the muscle. It's also a great shoulder stability move. And while you can do this move standing, I actually like doing the chest press to overhead press seated. A lot of times when we do overhead pressing standing, we seek out mobility from other areas. It might be why you find your lower back constantly is achy after you do overhead pressing. By doing a seated press, we take out our ability to seek out mobility from our lower body. We also have to work our core more to stabilize, especially if you're sitting on a bench that doesn't have a back. So if you really want to work your core more during the shoulder move, make sure you're sitting on a flat bench with no back to support you. Again, this is a great way to spend a little bit more time under tension and target that anterior and middle delt. Especially if you have a limited weight selection, so you might not be able to go as heavy as you would like for the standard overhead press, this is still a great way to challenge your shoulders. Exercise number 2 is the dumbbell external rotation. This is very similar to that band pull apart, and it's a great way to improve your shoulder stability while working your posterior delt. I like using the dumbbells because it has that extra little benefit of working your bicep as well, because you have to hold the weights up. It's that extra little isometric contraction for your biceps as well, because sexy shoulders go really well with sexy strong arms. We want to make sure that we're working that posterior delt for that nice shoulder cap, but also to improve our shoulder health. A strong posterior delt is super key because we spend so much time rounded forward. So when you do this move, make sure you're keeping your elbows in at your side as you're opening your arms out. You want to make sure that you're not just letting your elbows flare out because that's not going to give you the full benefit of that external rotation to really work that posterior delt. We have to remember that the posterior delt is worked by shoulder extension as well as external rotation, while the anterior delt is more worked by shoulder flexion and internal rotation. So we want to use this external rotation movement to really target that posterior delt and work on our shoulder health. When you do it, you want to keep your elbows even towards the front of your rib cage as you open up. And again, you're fighting against gravity and engaging that bicep in that isometric contraction. If you really struggle, you can use a band, but don't try and force a bigger range of motion. Even focus and pause at the end range of motion to make sure that you feel your posterior delt working. And really keep your chest pressed out as you stand nice and tall to do this movement. You don't want to round forward at all. Shoulder exercise number 3 is the angled fly. The rear pec deck is a great move to work that posterior delt. And as I mentioned, so much of our pressing really works that anterior of our shoulder that we need to make sure that we do spend a little bit more time with accessory lifts working that posterior delt. It's so key for our shoulder health. And the angled band fly is a great way to also work on our scapular mobility and stability because proper scapular movement is so key to keeping our shoulders healthy as well. So we want to make sure that we're not only developing strong and sexy shoulders, but also stable shoulders that will help us avoid aches and pains. To do the angled fly, you want to anchor a band up high so that you can have a little downward movement as you fly your arms open. Usually when we do that posterior delt fly, it's just straight on, chest height. But by having that slight downward angle, we're also going to work on our scapular depression and retraction. This is so key again to work on your scapular health while you're also strengthening the back of your shoulders. It will help you create that strong sculpted shoulder cap while also improving your shoulder health. Exercise number 4 is the seated snow angel. If you want to really target your middle delt, you need to include a lateral raise in your routine. I like this version of the lateral raise because it has an overhead component to not only work your middle delt, but also keep your shoulder blades healthy and happy, which will only promote your shoulder health. I like doing this move seated because when you're seated, again, you can't seek out mobility from your lower back as easily and you have to brace your core harder. Otherwise, you're going to fall over while sitting on the bench. If you really struggle with engaging your core, you could also sit up against the back of a bench so that you have that added stability. When you do this move, you're going to make sure that your shoulders are actually externally rotated, which will also engage your back a little bit more. Because you're lifting laterally, you're going to really target that middle delt. With that overhead component, you're also going to work on your scapular upward rotation, which will help keep your shoulder blades healthy. And again, it will also in turn allow you to train your shoulders more because you're keeping those shoulders healthy and happy. Make sure you go light with this move as it's a lot tougher than you really give it credit for, especially because you're not only raising to shoulder height laterally, but going all the way overhead. Shoulder exercise number 5 is the halos. Halos are a great shoulder mobility move that will work the entire deltoid muscle. If you want to make sure that you don't have neck, shoulder, or upper back aches and pains, you need to include this move, whether or not it's as an accessory lift in your routine or even as part of your warm-up to really activate and mobilize your shoulders. When you're circling around, you want to focus less on the loads that you're using and more on using a heavy load through a really big range of motion. So if you need to lighten the loads to start to get a fuller range of motion, do that. Don't get so stuck on trying to go heavier that you end up limiting the range of motion. You really want to reach down your back and circle all the way around your head without moving your head at all. This big circle will help open up and strengthen your shoulders through a full range of motion while also engaging the muscles that stabilize your shoulders. So if you want to improve your shoulder health while sculpting that nice shoulder cap, halos are a must-do move. Using these 5 moves, you can address the entire deltoid muscle. You can hit not only the anterior, but also the middle and posterior delt. It's key that you address all the different functions of the deltoid muscle if you want to hit all 3 aspects and really sculpt that nice shoulder cap, not to mention prevent shoulder, neck, and upper back aches and pains. If you liked the video, make sure to like it, comment below if you have any questions, and subscribe. We're posting new videos each week. Plus, in the video description, I'll link out to 4 shoulder workouts that utilize all 5 of these moves.